But anyway, Stephan, why don't we go with you?
Yeah, I don't know, you just raised the population thing, and there is some moderate growth. The growth is probably 1/3 what Minneapolis is experiencing. We provide, most of the cities in the state of Ohio are in decline in terms of population. Our largest center is Cleveland, and that has been declining, and Columbus is growing very rapidly because it, of course, is a state capital, and I suspect that if I looked at the state capital in any of the 50 states, you'd find at least 45 of them growing pretty healthily along the way.
Well, it helps that they've also annexed, like.
Yes.
Yeah, they can do. They're the capital, and of course that's a large growing segment of the economy is government, and so Cincinnati is drawing from Dayton and then picking up Kentucky, with the largest employer in the region being the airport, which is a good Delta regional hub. We certainly enjoy a healthy amount of growth in northern Kentucky. Our MPO, Metropolitan Planning Organization's name is OKI. This is a really original one. That stands for Ohio, Kentucky, and Indiana, which is part of the region. So we have the 4 counties in Ohio. I could be mistaken on these. It's 4 counties in Ohio, it's 1 in Indiana, it's 3 in northern Kentucky, which is ostensibly most of the population of the region. Even in the consolidated metropolitan area, probably is better than 3/4 of that. In any event, as to the organization and approach, I think we probably conform to the classic definition of the MPO, and that is that our members, we have 2 boards. One is an executive board, and one is an advisory board. The executive board and advisory board, I'm on both. If you're on the executive board, which is approximately 28 members, and that's changed a little recently. So it's 28 for the executive board. We meet monthly, and the advisory board meets quarterly, and that membership is some 150 odd representatives. Now these folks are almost entirely elected officials, either elected councilmen or elected city or county commissioners or judge executives, as is the case in Kentucky, which is the same thing as a county commissioner with some variation. I'm not sure exactly what. The larger cities have specific representation on the board, and then of course the 2 transit agencies in our collective area, ourselves and the one in northern Kentucky called TANK. Those 2 entities both get a representative on the board. Of course, as they always say, all God's children are equal, but then of course some are more equal than others. And what you discover pretty early on is that as a transit member, I probably carry a bigger stick than anybody else, because no matter what they want to do, they always have to come to us to get our signature on, and thus the phone call from our executive director, who was driving to Columbus to try to switch the CMAQ money, I alluded to it this morning, from the building a parking garage, which is clearly congestion litigation, as you can all clearly see, to building, actually there's a certain cosmic justice in it all, because now we're talking about building roads with this CMAQ money, and gee, what better method to reduce congestion than to build more roads? So I think this might be a first, that we might have to destroy the tape. Making sausage is a messy business, and if you want to be a participant in this process, the key to my fundamental understanding of this is that you've got to work at building a consensus. We walk in as the diva was referred to this morning, or excuse me, the maven, the individual who collects and has the compendium, the volumes of data that are ready to download at a second's notice and at internet high-speed rate, and the individual is just blown over by just the plethora of data and numbers that are coming their way, and they're not prepared to receive this information, nor do they necessarily want to. But if you're somebody who works with them regularly on projects that are maybe their pet projects, this is called log rolling in some fashion or form, and that's essentially what I'm involved with here. Yeah, you can transfer that money from the parking garage to building the road network down there. The federal dollars are already committed. My libertarian side says, well, hell no, let's turn it all back to the government and let some other municipality spend the money. But you'll get nowhere in the process if that's your approach. If you're there to try to find a consensus and try to steer the herd, like old Slim did in the TV show that was called Rawhide, where inevitably at some point in a 1-hour show the lightning would strike and the herd would stampede, and Slim was given the task of turning the herd, and that involved getting the lead bull by the nose, figuratively speaking, and turning him and then getting the herd to follow. Because I can tell you at the executive board meetings, as well particularly at the advisory board member meetings, the voice votes are almost unanimous. I'd say 95% of the time. In fact, the greatest concern that most members have is having the meetings conducted in as short a period of time as possible. So that gives you some insight into the level of enthusiasm or interest that most have for the particular issues that they're voting on. The role is advise and consent, and essentially all they're doing is consenting, and they've done their duty and they've gotten a check mark by their name, and this task or responsibility, which they inherited as a result of their elected position, has now been dispensed with for the next 30 or 90 days, depending on which board they're on. So nothing of substance is really going to occur there, although I was one of the exceptions to that. I made it very uncomfortable for these people because I was identifying the silliness of the process, not by naming anybody in particular. I was very careful not to, and in fact, when individuals' names came up, I would usually single them out in radio or television comments that I'd make as, no, they're a good person. If it was Judy Craig, our spokesman, she's not only a good spokesperson for OKI, she's getting paid to do this, folks, but she's also a good mom. Well, no one's going to take exception to your comment, and she is a good mom. So, you know, and these are the folks that I have to work with. So, not anymore. Judy resigned her position shortly after I got my board member position there, and went to work for Parson Brinkerhoff. And there was kind of a perfect symmetry there, because the head of Parson Brinkerhoff, no relation, Fred Craig, told me that he would never speak to me again, which is just fine with me, even though they got the contract with Metro to handle all of our preliminary engineering consultation. He doesn't come to the meetings, of course, because he's already told me he's not going to speak to me. It's unfortunate, but Judy's leaving OKI and going to Parson Brinkerhoff automatically disqualified Parson Brinkerhoff for any consideration in any contracts involving any project that we were currently involved in, because she was involved in those contracts before she went to Parson Brinkerhoff, and that meant that there was conflict of interest, and we wouldn't want the public to think that somehow or another we were unduly influencing decision making here. And I, by the way, I did not vote on that issue. I didn't want my name even involved in that. It was going to go a certain way, and I can't say that any tears were shed on my part, since they're probably the ones who funded the lawsuit against me in Columbus. That gets us way away from influencing this MPO, or Council of Government, and I'm referring to it as Council of Government because that's the closest thing that we have. I've attended regularly every meeting but one out of the last 16 or 17 months that I've been on the board, and I have recently asked that Mike Setzer, I alluded to him earlier in my presentation, he's the gentleman I took a picture of, I have asked him to stand in as my second at these meetings. I get still mailed the reports. I'm on the board. If I need to call Mark Policinski, I do. But I'm on 2 of the major investment studies now that we're undertaking. That's where the sausage is made. Those are the meetings. Those are everyone that wants to influence decision making shows up at the executive board meetings, but the decision's already been made. All the executive board is doing is saying aye. Occasionally there's a no, but that's pretty rare. Those individual meetings for the Western Corridor, the Eastern Corridor, the Uptown study, those are the things that I'm involved in now, and that's why I've asked Mike to sit in the board level. And that's because that's where you get into deciding the specifics of the study, what's going to be included in the comparisons, what's not going to be included. And there is a great deal of influence at that level. In fact, I would say 80 to 90% of everything takes place there. As far as I understand it, and again, I'm only in this for a year and a half, so I'm trying to figure out the process. It's not entirely open, although that's another method of influencing the MPO or the transit agency. We did file for under freedom of information. We filed with them twice, once during the campaign and once immediately after. During the campaign, they had to get out 3 or 4 of these tables and put all their documents on it. Of course, they didn't coordinate any of them, but that was okay. And 3 of us just went through on a fishing expedition looking for something, and we found that they'd spent $210,000 on a survey of citizens, an in-depth survey, which I happened to have been one of by random, in a half-an-hour interview. And they did a very good study on whether or not the tax issue would even pass and what percentages they had at the time of the survey. It was lots of information that was helpful to our campaign, plus the $200,000 number. We always just went ahead and added into the cost of them promoting the campaign. So you can find information there, and it's very unsettling when we get a freedom of information request at our agency. A lot of people are running in circles. They're concerned that somebody might, there's nothing at this point that we have to hide that I'm aware of, and if somebody finds something great, I want to know about it. But it can be a useful tool. The other freedom of information was after the election was over, and I was proposed as a candidate to be on SORTA and then OKI. There were all of those people who worked for the issue wrote the most vile, nasty letters, and I know they were vile, nasty letters because under freedom of information, I was entitled to get those letters, which I got, and I have their entire mailing list now because a lot of the letters are just form letters. So they peeled off several hundred of the people who were actually willing to sign it and put it in an envelope. So we know those are the most active members. So I put them on transit supporters email list. And whenever I have an issue like the transit center, transit hub, and we want to get some people out, I send them a notification that your transit agency is moving ahead, and then I sign at the bottom. And I get the first time or two that I sent these out, I got back these. Most of them returned the email by saying, "Who are you and where did you get my email address from?" I said, "Well, I got it under freedom of information. You wrote a really in-depth letter on me, and so you know who I am." Right. And I'm including you because obviously you're quite interested in transit. And oh, by the way, not a single one of them have shown up or shown any interest in anything Metro does. They were interested in one thing only, and that was a train. They don't give a damn about the transit agency. I've not found a single one of those individuals to ever participate in anything and I've given the list to our communications director and asked that she include them in any PR notifications. So again, I'm getting far afield here, and I think your experience is much greater in depth, but my suggestion is don't approach folks in a two-dimensional monochromatic way. You have to demonstrate some enthusiasm for working with them on their particular pet projects. You need to ally yourself with individuals who are moving other programs forward that you think are somewhat compatible with your political philosophy, and then attach your star to that. And I'm sorry for going on so long here, but thank you.
You made a good point that I want to tack on to mine if I could, is that is an excellent one, is the sausage often gets made at standing committees or ad hoc groups. And at the Metro Council, we have that. We have an environmental committee, a community development committee, a transportation committee, a management committee, and they are comprised of members. They kind of follow the legislative format where there's members that are on them. They aren't appointed like at a city level where you have citizen advisory groups. These are actual operating standing committees, and that's where the sausage is made. So I'm glad you brought that up.